attitudes. Is the hedge of protection wrong? No, it's not. The word refers to a shepherd. And it comes from the word to keep, like to keep your flock. It comes from this word. Now, I have the Strong's number for anybody who wants to go deeper. You can write that number down, but the word keep. For the Hebrews, they were a nomadic people, and they needed livestock all the time. And it would not be uncommon for a shepherd to walk his sheep out into the middle of nowhere to let them graze and then be stuck at night. You didn't want to travel at nighttime. So what would happen is that they would actually take thorn bushes and they would make a hedge around all of their sheep with thorns. It looks like a crown of thorns, right? But don't be weird about it, okay? I saw this and I'm like, it'd be so easy to be like, and Jesus wore a crown of thorns on his head. Just like this. It's not like that. They just would make this hedge of protection, and wolves and other critters and predators would normally not want to traverse a wall of thorns to get at your sheep. So the rabbis continued this tradition, and they used this wording as they wanted to talk about protecting their own flocks. So the hedge was designed to hinder individuals from breaking God's law. It was in the interest of those learning the law, not designed to be a law unto itself. But that's exactly what happened, and that was Jesus' problem with it. But the creation of such rules for one's life are not wrong in and of themselves. We'll see in chapter 2, if I remember correctly, Paul is actually accused of this legalism by the Gentiles. And then Jesus himself calls for hedges of protection around his own followers. We'll have to look here at Matthew 5. Jesus says, "Don't assume that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. For I assure you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of the letter will pass from the law until all things are accomplished." So Jesus didn't come to get rid of the law. And then Jesus continues. "You have heard that it was said to our ancestors, 'Do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. And whoever says to his brother, 'Fool,' will be subject to the Sanhedrin," which would be like the law courts of the day. "But whoever says, 'You moron,'" I love that translation, "'You moron,' will be subject to hellfire." That's a strong statement by Jesus. So what Jesus is saying, he says, you know what? You're not supposed to murder. That's what the commandment says. You know what? I'm going to expand that. You can't even get angry at your brother. You can't even get angry. Jesus continues. "You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.' But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your eye causes you to sin, cut it out and throw it away. For it is better to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown in hell." So wait a second. You can't commit adultery. But Jesus says, you know how you can't commit adultery? Even lusting after a woman is committing adultery. He's expanding that law to even include lust. And we have again, "You heard that it was said to our ancestors, 'We must not break an oath. But you must keep the oaths to the Lord.' But I tell you, don't take any oath at all, either by heaven, because it's God's throne, or by earth, because it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king." So he says, you know how we said about, keeping your oaths? Jesus says, don't make any oaths, because your yes should be yes, and your no should be no. When you say, "Yes, I will do this," you shouldn't need to say, "I promise," because you already said yes. So Jesus, again, is expanding this law, this rule. So the question is, why is Jesus so legalistic? Why is Jesus taking this law and expanding it and making it bigger? He talks about divorce, eye for an eye, loving your enemies, giving to the poor, praying, handling your money, how to fast, gathering treasures in heaven. And he finishes his sermon by saying, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house. Yet it didn't collapse because its foundation was on a rock. But everyone who hears the words of mine and doesn't act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded the house, and what do you think happened? It collapsed. And its collapse was great." So sometimes preachers come out and they say things like this, very black and white statements, and we get accused of legalism. But listen to Jesus' words. Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like the man who builds his house on a rock. Anyone who ignores these words and does not act on them is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Jesus is talking about the 10 Commandments. He's talking about money. But didn't Jesus come to eradicate all of that? You mean Jesus wants us to do things? I thought it was all about grace. But no, remember, Jesus is just as concerned about your life right now as your salvation. He's just as concerned about your testimony to those around you right now as he is concerned about their salvation, because we are God's representatives. We're here to represent God, and we're supposed to give people the gospel. If we have a poor testimony, people don't want what we have. So knowing the difference between legalism and establishing a hedge of protection is the first step of protecting ourselves